So first of all, thank you for joining. My name is Laura Hughes. I'm the Director of Business Development at Burns Engineering, and all that really means is I am not the person you want to hear from. So we are here to hear from our panelists and listen and learn as much as we can. The plan is to ask a few questions that we've teed up in advance. I think there's about 3 to 4 of those questions, and once we get about 45 minutes into this, we will open it up. There's a chat function in this platform, so you can type, as a participant, you can type a question into that chat function, and about 45 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and start diving into those questions and see how far we get. So with that, I'm just going to go through a brief introduction on the panelists, and then we will dive in. So first, we've got Jack Christine. Jack, I don't know if you want to wave to everyone. There we go. So Jack is the Chief Operating Officer for Charlotte Douglas International Airport, with responsibility for all aspects of airport development, operations, and facility maintenance at the airport. Since starting with the airport in 1997, Jack has worked on numerous projects including terminal expansions and the third parallel runway, a rail freight intermodal facility, and the airport's new consolidated rental car facility. So in Jack's current role, he's responsible for the implementation of Destination Charlotte. That's a 5-year, $3.5 billion capital program that includes planning, design, and construction of expansions to the terminal building. He also leads a dynamic group of airport staff, and I've met quite a few of them, and I would agree with that. That execute all the day-to-day functions at the airport, including airside, landside, terminal, and security operations. So in addition to Jack's position as COO for the airport, Jack also serves as an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and teaching courses in airport development. So welcome, Jack. I'm glad you're here, and thank you for participating.
Thanks for having me.
And next, we've got Robert Ramsey. Robert, if you want to wave to everybody. So Robert is the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority. So he joined in September 2003 and has been involved with numerous improvements in Nashville International and John C. True airports, including the $1.4 billion Nashville Vision, which includes a lobby renovation, terminal expansion, new D concourse, and additional parking garages. So Robert has worked on the consultant side of the industry as well, bless him, and has served our country in the U.S. Air Force. So thank you for your service, Robert. In his current role, Robert oversees the development in engineering, maintenance, operations, public safety, and strategic planning and sustainability departments. So Robert, thank you. Glad you're here and really appreciate your participation. Next, we've got Mike Tasker. So Mike is the Senior Manager of Aviation Facilities and Infrastructure, Port of Seattle, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. So he's got a 25-year history working in engineering with the Navy. Mike spent his first 10 years working in Navy nuclear power, learning chemistry, mechanical, electrical, and nuclear engineering disciplines. Wow. Followed by 15 years with the Navy Civil Engineer Corps doing planning, programming, budgeting, and project execution of large capital and renewal and replacement projects. So as well as specializing in asset and utility program management. In his current role at SeaTac, Mike serves as a facility management owner, in quotations, where standards requirements are defined for integration to base building infrastructure, as well as leading the asset management and utility groups. So, Mike, welcome. I'm glad you're here, and I'm really looking forward to the discussions. Okay, and last but not least, again, going in alphabetical order here, so no preferences. We've got Tom Woodrow. So Tom is the Vice President of Engineering, Allegheny Airport, Allegheny County Airport Authority. So Tom is the Vice President. Tom has over 31 years of professional experience, including project management, engineering, construction, and operations management. So he has experience in both the private and public sectors, including aviation, automotive, iron and steel, midstream oil and gas development, and public water and sewer. That covers it all. I'm not sure what I would add to that list, Tom. In this role, Tom is responsible for managing the design, engineering, contracts, and construction for all capital improvement projects at both the Pittsburgh International Airport and the Allegheny County Airport. So Tom, thank you. Welcome aboard. Really glad you're able to join the panel discussion. So we're just going to dive right in. I'm looking to see the chat just to make sure there's no problems. Doesn't look like there is. So I'm just going to go to my screen here and move on. So Jack, I'm going to throw the first question to you. And then from there, we can just let the other panelists chime in, add on, or I think, Mike, what you said, there might be a lot of ditto. So we'll just see how this goes. So let me get to the first question if I can. There we go. Question 1. What steps, Jack, has your airport taken, Charlotte, to instill or restore passenger confidence that it is safe to fly?
Well, thanks, Laura. And I have to say thank you to you and your team for putting this together. This is a great opportunity for us to share some of the things we're doing and maybe learn a few things from each other on how we're managing through operational resiliency, just with what we're doing every day, but also other things, because the rest of the world does continue to turn. And so we're going to talk about a number of different things today. But obviously, whatever is on everybody's mind is the impacts from the pandemic. And so in Charlotte, we are in a somewhat more unique position because our hub carrier is American Airlines. When the airlines decided how they were going to deal with the pandemic, most of them cut a whole bunch of activity. American, on the other hand, went the other direction and is flying as much as they possibly can. So in our case, we started to see more of a rebound in our operations and passenger numbers a lot faster than what a lot of other airports are seeing so far. And so that's put us kind of really up in the front edge of how to manage trying to restore that passenger confidence. And so one of the first things that we did when we realized that this was going to be a longer term issue was to take subject matter experts from all the different elements of our operation and our business side and create what we call the experience recovery team. And their group really focused on all the different aspects that we could possibly think of on how to manage the passenger expectation, as well as what physical things we needed to do from a cleaning perspective, from a maintenance perspective, to help us create a cleaner environment than we already had at Charlotte, and then be able to tell that story so that we get people comfortable that flying is not going to be necessarily a negative experience. And so the ERT first looked at a number of the physical things that needed to happen. We had a mandate for things like face masks and social distancing, things that a lot of states have enacted. So we tried to make sure we married that up with what the state mandates were. The challenge for us being a hub is 3/4 of the people that are coming into the building are coming from other places. So especially at the beginning, before there was more of a national consensus on mask wearing, as an example, we had a lot of work to do to help educate people coming into the building that was something that was important. But we focused a lot of effort on trying to deliver that message and integrating that message into our signage and wayfinding throughout the building. Like a lot of other airports have done, we have marketing that we've targeted specifically for wearing your mask, washing your hands, staying socially distant, and keeping that message going through the whole facility. So as people walk through the building, they don't just see it one time, they see it continuously as they move through. And so we focused our efforts there. The other place that we focused a lot of our effort was enhanced cleaning, trying to make sure that we were hitting all the high touch points within the building, which when you start to think about it, there's a lot more than you might initially anticipate. But things from, the restrooms are an obvious example, but the ticket counters and the gate counters, the handrails for all of the escalators and moving walkways, the touch buttons on the elevators, I'm sorry, all those things we needed to look at again. And, with our volume of passengers prior to COVID, our maintenance team or our janitorial team did a really good job of trying to clean the place up in between the banks and then try and kind of melt out of the way while people were moving through the building and then going back and cleaning again between the next bank. In today's environment, we're taking a very deliberate, different approach in that you're going to see people, our janitorial staff, cleaning all the time. And you're going to see them while you're moving through the building because, number one, visually, that instills more confidence. And two, in order to keep the building as clean as we possibly can, we can't wait for those gaps in the bank system to be able to do that. So we took some of those deliberate steps from a cleaning perspective to make it more visible and to do things a little bit differently so that the passenger feels more comfortable flying. And then the other thing I would say is mechanically, we stepped back and we looked at our HVAC systems, and a number of the parts of our building have different types of mechanical filtration, but some don't. Some of the original parts of the terminal building that were built in the 1980s and early 90s vintage had good filtration, but it's more the normal run-of-the-mill filtration. We increased the filter type for all of the ventilation throughout the whole building, moving to a minimum of a 13 filter style. And we have launched a study that we're looking at right now on how to add things like bipolar ionization or UV light to help also increase the filtration of the air moving through the building system. So there are things that are continuing to be ongoing that we continue to do, and we're trying to look at ways that we can continue to increase the cleanliness, increase the air quality, and increase the customer's level of comfort throughout the building. So there's a lot there. I'm sure everybody else has got stuff that they're doing too, but those are kind of the high points of what we're doing in Charlotte.
Oh, Jack, thank you. I mean, that was very thorough, but Mike, Robert, Tom, are there some kind of asterisks you want to add to that? Or I know that obviously every airport's a little bit different, and you try things out and they work and then they don't work, but I'd love to hear from your experiences what your take on this is.
I'll start. And it starts with, thank you. I see myself on the left, but kind of the ditto thing. And it's like, Jack started going, yeah, we call it Healthy Seattle. We have a Seattle recovery team. Same kind of people who are meeting to come up with these same things. And, we have this, as part of going through that and figuring it all out, it's messaging, it's getting the message back to the public. So we have a web page. It's kind of our part of the Port of Seattle, which is Fly Healthy at SCA, which provides statistics on all of those things about where the hand sanitizers are, all the signage and wayfinding. We've got 8,000 new signs. We've removed some seating so people can't get close together. We put signs in seats so they don't get together. We've done the evaluation of the HVAC system. Same kind of thing, MERV 13 plus, all those things that Jack has talked about, Charlotte. So it's pretty interesting. Some of the other things we've seen is, what you're seeing here is virtualization. Part of the stuff there is if you don't have to be there to keep the social distance, what can you do from home? And that has been, a big thing. It's kind of hard for a lot of people to do that shift from a leadership perspective, is to lead remotely. And, we've been working through that, and this kind of technology has allowed us to do those things. So if you don't need to be there, we've staggered workforce to go in at different times. We meet all virtually now like this, so we don't have to sit in the conference room. We do masks. We do job hazard analysis, which says if someone has to be working within that 6 foot of separation, what PPE should they be wearing? If you have 2 men on a man lift, what are you kind of doing? But the big thing is getting that message out to the public, to let them know what you're doing. It's like Jack says, it's kind of like we're doing the similar things. We've even done presser on TV that talked about our airflow, because we've got one of these people here in the Northwest with Boeing. They talked about air on airplanes. Well, how's the air in the airport? And we've done some specific stuff on the air in the airport and talked about how good our air is, et cetera. So, yeah, early on, it's probably going to be a lot of ditto, and I'm thankful Jack started because I can say ditto on most of it. So.
Robert or Tom, if you have anything you'd want to add on to that, but also I'd love to hear, just as a bit to this, are there things that you're looking to do next? I mean, I'm sure that through this whole process, there's lots of lessons learned. And I think Jack alluded to some of that as well. But yeah, Robert, I think you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so we dittoed a lot of what Jack had talked about. We've done a similar path. The one thing with the public cleaning, going from behind the scenes to kind of the forefront. We're also doing putting a lot of things on social media, talking about how cleaning, even videos of them cleaning the hold rooms, just getting that word out there. Some of our next steps that we're looking at and a lesson learned, looking at UV in our handlers. We've got everything wired up. We're waiting for bulbs to arrive to install them in air handlers. We also, in working with their escalators, because those handrails, it's a continuous run, putting UV in the escalators. So we had that installed, had that installed about 2 weeks ago. It turns out the state fire marshal in the state of Tennessee had not approved that modification. So we had to pull it back out. We hope the next time their board meets, it's scheduled to get that approved. So you need to, even in a pandemic, you've got to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. So we hope to get that reinstalled and the okay from our state inspectors here in November or December, so we can get that back in place. But that's that way it's continuously cleaning and signage there, because it's a great thing, but people can't see it. So you've got to, it doesn't make them feel comfortable if they don't know it's there. So.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's the first I've heard on the escalators. Maybe other airports are implementing that or have tried as well, but that's an interesting bit. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'll just toss in briefly. We're doing much of what everybody else is doing, but you know, Pittsburgh is a very is a hub for high tech and robotics. So we've been partnering with some local robotic firms, and we've been pilot testing some UV robotics. We also have floor cleaning robots. If anybody's looked at any of our Blue Sky articles or looked on our website, we actually have robots that clean the floors in both the airside and landside terminals. We've also implemented a lot of touchless transactions. So those are just a couple things to add on to what some of the other folks.
No, that's a great ad. And I'm trying to think if I've seen that in any other airports, but I don't believe I had, even though Mike, Robert, Jack, you may have added those. That kind of, I saw someone ask a question on the chat already that actually goes into the next question. So whoever asked that question, I think that's a great lead in. And Robert, I'm gonna turn this over to you first, if I can get there. There we go. So here we'll just go right into the second question, which each of your airports was in the midst of a large program, and how has this pandemic affected that program? How have you had to pivot? How have you had to make some changes? And I guess really had to prioritize perhaps in these cases. So Robert, if you want to tackle that first, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. So we're about 3 years in to a 6-year program at the B&A Vision, and we have thankfully we've got our bonds, almost $1 billion worth of bonds in late December, well before the pandemic. So we have the funding in place, and we're able to continue with that program. It has actually allowed us, we've been seeing record-setting growth, almost 15% for the last several years, and averaging over 10% growth year for the last 7 years. So it's been really dynamic growth here in Nashville. And we have had, with that, just keeping up and the phasing and with the construction sequencing was going to become very difficult. And just pulling carpet out to put terrazzo down. I know how much Jack loves terrazzo. Well, so we are working through that. With the reduction, we were actually able to speed up when our passenger numbers fell, that 95% in the peak of that in late March, early April. We pushed the accelerator down to speed up terrazzo about 3 years ahead of schedule to speed those portions up. That's probably the biggest example I've got that we were able to take advantage of a bad situation. The other portions of our operating expense, to the question that was posed, our operating expenses and our capital expenses outside of the major capital program, we froze all of our other capital spending, or the bulk of that capital spending. Hiring freezes in place, really tightened the belt to control all expenses. If it's not a mandatory expense, we're probably not spending that money. With the vision program we've got going on now, we've already got those bonds pulled. So in 2.5 years, that note's coming due. So we are moving ahead with that construction. But the other portions, we've really tightened the belt, and we'll be, until it starts to look a little bit better, we'll slowly, hopefully pick that back up. But for right now, very cautious in trying to control expenses is the biggest portion of our strategy right now.
Okay. I assume there may be some dittos on this as well, outside of maybe the continued growth. But in that also, when you're thinking of responses, or Tom or Mike or Jack, if you want to add to that also, there's of course the crystal ball question in terms of when you think you'll be back. But you could interject that into some of the responses to this question. Mike, Tom, Jack, you have any thoughts on that?
So I'll jump in. So for those who don't know, we at Pittsburgh, we're in the midst of what we were calling our terminal modernization program. So we were in the midst of designing a new landside terminal and relocating it adjacent to our airside terminal. And yeah, unfortunately, we were scheduled to start the major early site works package in June of this year, and so we had to, of course, suspend that work. We're going to run the whole project through 100% design through the end of the year, early into next year, and our goal is to get back on track and begin construction next summer. Other than that, similar to what was mentioned, we pretty much suspended every capital project we had except grant funded projects. So any projects that were grant funded, we did move forward with, and we suspended nearly every other non-grant funded capital project we had for the year.
In Seattle, sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Okay. In Charlotte, we have a really large program we're about halfway through. It's a 10-year program with Destination CLT. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the major projects, or the largest projects, actually had just started about last year. The biggest one being the terminal lobby expansion. So those projects are continuing on. We have the funding largely in place for those. But we have a number of smaller projects that we've, hit the brake on a little bit just to time this out correctly. We had a joint operations center that we had opened bids on, and we're getting ready to go to our city council for award in March when all this first happened. And so we shelved that project. We were also working on a consolidated distribution receiving facility that was going to be on the south side of the airfield. That we were just starting the grading, and we canceled that contract and buttoned the site up, and we will have to come back to that at a future time. But probably the biggest project that we've slowed down on is Concourse A expansion phase 2, which is another 10-gate expansion that is now pretty much we're between 90 and 100% design. We're doing that project through a construction manager risk process, and so we already have the contractor on board for pre-construction services, and so we've stalled that project for a period of time, just to make sure that we get those gates online when we absolutely have to have them. There are some other projects that are connected to that concourse expansion that will need to handle those additional gates within the next 3 to 4 years. So we have a little bit of gap that we can work with here, that it's not really hurting us a whole lot to not have them, other than, American, like I mentioned when we first started, they're flying more than a lot of the other carriers are right now. And they've said very, very openly that their focus is on bringing the network back through Dallas and Charlotte. And so they're still talking to us about, well, when are those future gates going to come online? Because their network planning folks are already thinking about what they get out of those. They don't get all 10 gates, but they get a bump in capacity, as well as some of our other carriers that serve the market. So, it's a dance right now as far as some of the elements of the capital program, and when we pull the trigger to move forward with those. I guess the good news is we're not talking about never doing the projects. It's really a question of how long do we delay before we go back into it, because it's very clear that we're going to, as we come out of the pandemic, Charlotte's been identified to continue to have growth within the hub network for American. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about is not a question of will we do it, it's just when. The fourth parallel runway that we're working towards is also, we're going a little slower in the implementation. We're not stopping the project, but we're trying to marry that timing up, that we get it online as the recovery comes full swing, and we get the most bang for our buck out when we commission the runway. So we're looking at it very, very carefully, but only stopping the things that we have to.
In Seattle, similar, we have kept the projects that have been started underway. We've prioritized, we've slowed down some starts because of some resource challenges, because like on the OpEx side, as we put on hiring freezes, et cetera. On the capital side, because of different funding profiles, we have moved most of the projects forward. 2021 projects, someone I saw talk about asset management, maintenance, is instead of the shiny new, we started taking a look at more of the existing assets for renewal and replacement perspective, because in the past, shiny and new always was preferable to maintaining your existing. So with the slowdown and the pause, we have evaluated and said, hey, I keep the existing facility operational. So let's make sure we prioritize some of those renewal and replacement projects. And also for our facilities infrastructure to support our long-term planning. We've got a lot of the underground utilities at 50+ years old. And as we've grown, we've now got a little bit of reprieve because we've been outside the capacity of our sanitary sewer lines, et cetera. So the slowdown, because in the Northwest, we also had that massive rapid growth that everybody experienced, that we basically out-passengered our facility and had very dense, facility planning. So we were trying to expand. And now this has allowed us to maybe catch up. It doesn't get us caught up, but we've heard, and I think one of the questions before I asked Laura was, what we'd heard anecdotally is maybe 3 to 4 years to have 19 numbers. And I don't know, again, Northwest, this is planning, and is it going to be that way? Because with technology, things are changing. People will say that we're going to come back with the leisure passenger, and a lot of the business passengers may never come back to the same. We don't know.
Yeah.
But this is allowing us from an infrastructure side to say, let's get our infrastructure right. Let's make sure we have the plan for the infrastructure so that if the growth starts, we can be ahead of it versus being behind it like we were recently.
That's the kind of how you ended, Mike, on the crystal ball bit. 3 to 4 years. I've heard 2023. I've heard, I think it is a bit fuzzy now. But just real quick on the without, expanding too much, Robert, Tom, Jack, are you thinking that 3 to 4 year window too, or is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Tom, yeah, he's.
To be honest, we're looking year at a time.
Yeah.
So we are just put together our plan. A lot of talk about 2 or 3 years down the road, but it's hard to predict what's going to happen from one day to the next.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. And 3 to 4 years, who knows, 2 months from now. So I keep telling people I'm a paid optimist. So I'm gonna stay that way. So Mike, actually, this is a good segue, because the next question I'm gonna turn over to you first. And that here we are. Pivoting a little bit away from kind of the current pandemic, but and talking more about utility resiliency. What utility resiliency does your airport have? Redundant, separate pathways, generators, and I think that will lead into then, Tom, some of the discussion that you and Mike were having, kind of pre-panel. So, but Mike, I'll let you tackle that one first.
Right. Thanks for the question, Laura. Yeah, we take a lot of pride in, the way we've kind of addressed this in the Northwest, where, what is resiliency? What is that question? Basically, resiliency is kind of a toughness. How can you respond? How do you keep your airport operational when you have a casualty or an event that you hadn't planned for? And a lot of times the way we've dealt with resiliency is redundancy. So if back when I talked about my previous submarine life and nuclear powers, we always said it took 3 to make 1, because something was broken, something was being maintained. I don't need that same level of resiliency, because you have to be able to pay for it in the world we're at. But a lot of times you need 2. So we have double-ended substations or power centers. So I have redundant feeds on 2 different sides of the airport. Again, there is a common feed from our primary power supply, 30 miles away. So there is a single source there. But we keep our power feeds to the power centers separate. So we can, if we lose one side, we can feed from the other side. We also have our alternative utility facility. So our peak power requirements are about 22 to 23 megawatts, and we have a 30 megawatt plant, diesel power generators, 10 3-megawatt generators that allow us to island in an emergency, that if we were to lose power, we can continue to operate. These generators, have day tanks, but they can also be derated to run on jet fuel, to use our jet fuel tanks. Our heating source, we have heating with natural gas, but currently we have a diesel fuel option. So we have about 3 days of diesel fuel. Say on a natural gas disaster, which we actually had here in the Northwest 2 years ago, about 2 days ago, 2 years and 2 days ago, the whole pipeline went down. So we had to get creative, because our bus transportation fleet was running on natural gas. So we shifted our fuel, or our heating source, to the fuel oil, and we ran that. So we got through about 2 days before it was recovered. And we had a plan for what we were going to do for busing. So we had to go out and see if we could procure some buses. And water sources, we have to worry about that from a water, because in Seattle, we are the utility. Unlike a lot of other places, you have a utility. I'm actually the utility in Seattle. So I have the ability to go source my power and do all that stuff. So I'm even the cable TV provider in the Puget Sound. So I can be the cable guy as well. So it means we have to be thinking about all those things. I have to have a separate source of water in case I lose water, because we have to make sure the toilet's flush. A lot of times people don't think about all these things that, the facilities folks are going through. Most people take it for granted. You want the lights to turn on when you want the lights to turn on. You want the water to be clean when you want to drink water, etc. So in the Northwest, very proud of the work that we've done, but it starts with some of our facility standards, so that when someone wants to connect to our utility system, they do it in a way that keeps the system working. One of the key elements there is maintainability. It's back to that resiliency is, if something breaks, you need to have a spare part to fix it. with our facility standards, we don't allow any option. We basically give people 3 different options because in a public environment, we want to make sure people can compete and get the best prices. So we rarely sole source. But with that, by having that reduced number of parts for different things, it allows our supply and our maintenance folks to have parts on hand. So if something breaks, they can easily repair it. So high level, kind of proud of the work that we've done. Generators, we've done it pathways, alternate feeds, etc.
Mike, thank you. That's a great response. And obviously you are prepared, I would say. It's a case of the biggest risk is the unknown risk, right? So it sounds like you've got a lot of bases covered. But Robert, Tom, Jack, what's your lens on this?
Well, in Charlotte, we focused a lot on resiliency on all of our systems over the last 10 years. A lot of it started with our electrical redundancy. We had 2 separate feeds coming to the airport, one from the north, one from the south, but they were not interconnected. And there was a lot of the line that was above ground and subject to things like falling trees and flying cars, different things that we needed to fix. And so we buried the lines on the north side feeding the terminal from the substation all the way to the terminal. And then on the south side, we buried a lot of that and created a cross connection. So now we have 2 feeds coming to the airport from either side. So if we lose power, you're always going to have a single point of failure at some point, but what you're trying to do is push that as far down the line as you possibly can. And so this gives us a lot of redundancy to make sure that if the power goes out from one substation, we're going to be able to get it from the other. And that's proven to be very, very helpful. We had a number of issues with trees coming down a few years ago, hitting the lines, knocking power out. And when the chief operating officer from American comes to your office and says, you need to fix this, we took that really seriously. We said, yes, sir, Mr. Isom, I got it. We'll fix it. So we focused on that, but that made us really step back and say, okay, well, what do the other utilities look like as well? And so over the last couple of years, we've enhanced our water redundancy by creating a loop for the terminal complex so that we can isolate issues on the water line to keep water pressure to the terminal. We've done the same thing with our fuel system. Our in-pavement fuel system is now looped so that we can segregate that if we have an issue or we have maintenance to do. We can continue to supply fuel to all the gates, which is becoming increasingly important as we continue to grow in the number of gates. Having more fuel trucks is not an option. So you need to be able to have that fuel system with redundancy so that it continues to run. The other thing that we did with the fuel farm itself was increase capacity, so we had more days of fuel on hand. The eye-opening experience for us on that one was Hurricane Katrina. We actually have fuel coming to our fuel farm underground from 2 different fuel sources, but during Katrina, both of them went down, and we got within 4 hours of running out of fuel in Charlotte. And so we, after that happened, at that point, we had about 3 days of fuel capacity in the system. And we bumped that up to 6 days of capacity so that we can ride out almost a full week of not being able to get fuel deliveries because it's so critically important to the operation. But we've looked at all the different types of utilities. We have really good resources when it comes to natural gas. So that one was the easiest one to ensure we had redundancy on. But then the other part of it is quite frankly, is beyond utilities, is the IT infrastructure. And we're still, that is a work in progress for us. We have some things that have good redundancy, and we've got other systems that we have a plan for how we're going to get that redundancy in place. But as the airlines start to rely more and more on the Air Force to provide that IT infrastructure, that is becoming more and more of an issue. There were, when I first started at the airport, when we designed a project, we typically called the IT folks in a couple of months before we opened up the building and said, hey, what do y'all need in here? Now it's an integral part of the design process because the IT functions run so deep in the program now that you really have to look at that on the front end. And so over time, we've adapted, we've learned different things that help us, prepare for that redundancy and that resiliency on all the different fronts. And we keep looking for other ways to do it too.
Yeah, the IT infrastructure is sometimes overlooked and obviously becoming more and more critical. So Tom, Robert, I'm not sure if you have any responses to that, but I think we could maybe just flow into the next question, because I think this, no pun intended, feeds into that. So I'm just going to go for it here. And Tom, this is going to be directed to you first. I kind of know the answer, but I made it more broad to address the panel. But has your airport, yes, implemented or considered implementing a microgrid? And if so, what were the considerations, or what are the considerations if you're some of the other guys here are looking at that option? So I'd love to hear from you, Tom.
Okay, great. Thanks. And I'll try to keep this very high level, given the time. So several years ago, this is over 2 years ago, the concept of a microgrid was batted around among our leadership team for various reasons, and we started looking into it a bit. And but then in the wake of some of the major power outages that some of us may remember from a couple of major airports in the country, and you can see what happens. There's just horrible customer experience issues, and has a rippling effect across the entire industry with canceled flights and lost revenue. And quite honestly, the price of the lights going out is nearly impossible to quantify. So we started looking, and I know this call's being hosted by Burns, and I see Mike Walton's on the line there. So we worked with Burns to put together a request for qualifications to go out on the street and try to get some firms and get a private company, public private relationship going on how we could put together a microgrid, because we had no idea what we were doing. And so to cut to the chase, the point is that we were very vulnerable. Our infrastructure at Pitt is 30 years old, and after U.S. Air dehubbed after 9/11, quite honestly, we were left with an airport that was way bigger and does not function correctly for the way Pittsburgh operates now. So some of our infrastructure has not been attended to as maybe as well as it could have over the last 20 years, as some of the other folks on the line. So we're looking to increase resilience and reliability, to be able to operate in island mode connected from the grid. We will maintain an interconnect to the grid in the event we need emergency or backup power. But we're putting in over a 20 megawatt energy plant that will operate on with natural gas fired generators. It will be our primary source of electricity, and it will essentially keep us, provide 100% plus of all the electricity that we will need, in addition to any expansions or future development that we may have on our property that we may be able to extend to. For example, we have the 911th Air Wing of the Air Force on our property, and 171st Pennsylvania Air National Guard on our property. So our airport functions also as a, with regard to national security. We need to keep the airfield open. We need to have resilience and reliability for the military bases, and those were the main considerations. And just given that we're sitting on an abundance of natural gas for a fuel source, that helped the project as well. We were able to lower the price of electricity to our tenants and the authority, and we were able to support that local natural gas industry, which was one of our goals. And we also were able to support some of our sustainability goals because we do have a solar component. So I'll just leave it there, given the time.
Well, that's a nice double-edged sword, right? Supporting the local economy while getting that redundancy and resiliency. So, Mike, Robert, Jack, to what extent have you, I believe from what I know that you have all looked into this somewhat, and sometimes it's feasible and sometimes it's not. Where do you stand today, I guess is the question.
I'll start on this one. Tom and I had a short discussion before was, I'm kind of a fan of some of this stuff with cogen, and I like the microgrid. And the key element of the microgrid is to be able to island, as Tom has already said, to be able to stand alone. So if you lose the primary utility, you can continue operation from a resiliency standpoint. Part of the challenge we have in the Northwest is having that ultimate source of energy. Our primary power in the Northwest comes from hydroelectric dams. We get very cheap power. I can deliver power at 4.5 cents per kilowatt because I get it today. Prices will go up in time, I'm sure. But the other thing in the Northwest is carbon. Here we talk about the Evergreen State, and our governors are working to remove natural gas as a fuel source, potentially for us to get power. So I'm down to, I've got effectively, we get solar and wind, but none of those will provide base load, right? So I've got to have a whole bunch of energy storage to provide base load. But what we've been doing, effectively have a microgrid because we have our alternate utility facility, which allows us to island. And then we have to worry about the environmental impacts of running diesel generators. If it's an emergency diesel generator, you meet tier 2 emissions. If you want to sustain it, it's tier 4 emissions, probably way beyond the audience. But we basically can only, other than testing, we get limited testing hours. But unless there's an emergency, we don't really get to operate it, right? So different than they have in other parts of the country. So for me, for a microgrid, I've got to be investigating, battery technologies and things to cover base load, and those kind of things. So, I'm a fan of it, and I'm happy to see others do it. In previous lives, I spent a whole lot of time doing the research and investigating cogen, because I like cogen as well. But depending on where you are in the country, you've got to have that other source for the power. And if you have a good source of natural gas, you've got a good leg up on anybody else.
Yeah, Mike, thank you very much. Jack, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to this. I know you guys have poked around looking at this a little bit. If you want to add anything, and then I've seen at least a couple questions coming in from the Q&A, but did you want to just add a little bit of thinking?
Yeah, what I would say is, we did talk and look into the option of doing a microgrid for Charlotte. We've not pursued that at this point. We focused instead on investing the money on the redundant feeds, and also, we've done a couple of solar projects here. Not that we're ready to, transition of the whole airport to solar, but for certain buildings, we have implemented solar programs so that we can help offset the typical electrical usage, but it also gives us some option because the systems, or at least a couple of them, have battery backup, so that we're storing power. If we needed it, we could use it for that particular building. But microgrids, they can be really expensive. So, as we're trying to look at the capital dollars and trying to spread everything around, that we had to be pretty effective in how we did that. So for the moment, we're not pursuing a microgrid, but it doesn't mean that we won't at some point in the future. Just right now, it's not something that we can do. But one of the questions in the chat box there, related to power and things like that, is about redundancy on escalators and elevators and people movers. I can tell you in Charlotte, we do not have any of those systems on backup power. But one of the things we did do when we did Concourse A expansion phase 1 is we ensured that every jet bridge is on emergency backup power, so that in the event we did lose power to the building, we had the ability to get people off the airplanes. And it would be a slow process because you don't have them all running. But that is now a design standard as we do additional gate additions in Charlotte, that every other gate would be electrical on the emergency power system. So we have some flexibility there.
Yeah. As a frequent passenger, I appreciate I appreciate that
We don't have
very
enough
much.
stairs to go around to get people up the airplane.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it. You mentioned the Q&A, and I see a question here. It's from Michael Winters, and the question is, what will be the legacy elements that will carry over after the pandemic? So, are there things that have been learned and adopted that will carry forward? And I guess I'll just add a piece onto that, which is perhaps the other bright spot here is, are there things that the pandemic has accelerated that you would have over time implemented anyway, but maybe at a slower pace? I'm thinking touchless technology, et cetera, and has that accelerated things like that. So anyone want to dive into that? Robert?
Yeah, I think the touchless technology is probably here to stay, regardless whether it's a pandemic. There's always some kind of cold or flu season, or the next H1N1 or something else out there. So I think the touchless technology is definitely not going anywhere. We've actually sped up the installation with touchless elevator controls. We're in the process of installing those now. So I think that's one thing, at least here in Nashville, I think that's will definitely be a new standard as we move forward.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that we're seeing with the HVAC filtration will also become more standard. Some of this was a reaction to the pandemic and trying to do everything we can to clean the air as much as possible, but it has some other benefits to it as well. And we're finding that things like UV technology and bipolar ionization are not ultra expensive. And so it's something that I think will become more of a standard in the way that we design the building systems for retrofits and for new buildings, new parts of the building, because it's helpful to the overall building automation system.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit of that. I'll kind of add on to Jack's thing with HVAC is knowing what's required with ventilation filtration is, HVAC systems need to be designed with the filtration in mind. If you didn't design the system, say for MERV 13, there is more head loss, there is more static pressure. This is mechanical engineering terms that all the engineers here all get, but it uses a lot more energy. So if the system wasn't designed for the increased filtration, it's going to potentially wear those systems out earlier. So going forward, that may kind of speed up those things, because there was some stuff with technology and energy things where there's a little bit of conflict with ventilation and less recirculation of air, more fresh air, outside air dampers. There is some of that, and some of that kind of is a little different than what here in Washington we had specific energy codes which wanted as much recirculation as possible to save the heating and cooling. So we have to work through those kind of things from the HVAC side, but I think that's going to accelerate that. And we've already mentioned touchless, that has accelerated that for us with new standards. And we've kind of said, hey, with our new facilities we'll go forward with touchless, but we've also done retrofits with touchless. And one of the things that we've been doing, and I think is here to stay, is lease space in our airport is worth a whole bunch of money from generating non-aeronautical revenue. As leaders, we've slowly learned to work virtually and kind of remotely with our teams. And with that, I think it's going to, all of us have to go into work, but not every day and not for 8 to 10 hours. This virtualization, like we're doing here with this panel, is going to be something I think stays with us, where our footprint for administrative footprint in the facility will decrease, which will allow us to lease back some of that space and generate some more non-aeronautical revenue. Have more hot desks possibly than offices, and maybe have some shared offices for non-specific.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that statement cuts across the board to a lot of different industries, right? Reevaluating the footprint. Tom, Jack, Robert, before we wrap up, one of the things that I've heard, and this is just, I don't see any additional questions right now in the Q&A, but depending on the amount of land that's available to you, I mean, I've heard statements made, a lot of focus on cargo. And, you know, if you've got land and you've got airfield, is that something that you're starting to look at a little bit more? Or I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
So, yeah, this is Tom. So yes, we are actively working on cargo. We've done some cargo expansion in the last 2 years, and we are just actually just going to be beginning the design on a additional cargo expansion. Pittsburgh is so close to I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but I know it's very interesting how the total population and its closeness to Pittsburgh. So and we have access to highways, and it's just really fast. We're very quick at being able to get cargo in and out. So we are actively looking and working on cargo expansion. It's one of our strategic initiatives.
Okay.
We've seen a lot of cargo growth over the last couple of years, a lot of it driven by Amazon.
Yep.
Geographically, like Pittsburgh, we're located in a good spot where we can move a lot of commerce through the region here because of our interstate connections. So we do see cargo starting to become more of our portfolio. For a long time, it had not been, but I do sense that there's growing demand for additional cargo facilities with access to the airport. Now, whether they're on the airfield specifically, having airplanes come up to the back door, or they're related facilities that are moving traffic as freight forwarders and things like that, we're seeing a mix of that demand here in Charlotte. So we're on top of that too.
Great. Robert, did you want to add
We're
something?
actively pursuing cargo. We've got great interstate access. We've got 3 interstates within 2 miles of the airport. So great connectivity there. The one challenge, we do have a little bit of a geographic challenge in the fact that Louisville is about 4 hours to the north, and Memphis with their FedEx hubs about 3.5 hours to the west. So we're a great alternate for either one, Brown trucks or the other trucks, but it's a little too close to each of those major hubs, so it makes it tough to get first tier there. So we're looking at other alternatives for cargo.
Okay, understood. Well, with that, I think we're right on time. I know your time is valuable, so I don't want to go over, but because I think we could go over on a multitude of topics. But I really appreciate Mike, Robert, Tom, Jack, your time today, and I hope that for the folks listening in, it was valuable, and I learned a lot. So I appreciate it very much. Anything you guys want to close out with?
I just thank everybody for attending this afternoon. I hope it was helpful. And if there's anything that comes up that you thought about later on, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're here. We're here to help.
I really appreciate
that. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo all that. And again, we're here, and the part of this in this industry is, we've said ditto because we've been doing some behind the scenes collaboration through some of the airport facility councils as part of implement some other things. So any questions, reach out. And again, thanks for the opportunity. And sometimes you don't get engineers together because engineers, what we talk about isn't too exciting. And I didn't see anybody fall asleep when I was talking, which is not normal. So
that's remarkable.
Yeah.
No, I mean, not particularly related to you, but just in general in this type of a platform, that's amazing. So well done.
But thanks.
Okay, I appreciate it all. Thank you very much.